I made this lard from chicken, beef, and obviously pork. Why? Because they can all work together to make a combination fat that's good for frying, baking, and is shelf stable. Later on in the video I'll tell you why, but more importantly, how you can avoid nasty odors that will ruin this lard for you. Do not spill it. Start with frozen fat and keep it in the freezer for at least 24 hours before you work on it. This keeps the fat from melting and makes it easier to cut into manageable chunks. Don't worry about the meat chunks here though. This is belly fat and it will have them, but they won't show up in the final product. You can cut these chunks by hand with a sharp knife. It will make more effort and time, but you can do it. The drawback is that you won't cut evenly everything, so it won't render evenly, and you'll be there a while. If you have a food processor and a sliding disc attachment, it fixes a lot of these issues. It makes a quick work of the process by shaving the fat down to even slices, which will render evenly. Also, this is why you need to keep it frozen. The motor generates a lot of heat, and if the fat is thawed, it's going to jam in the machine. All these flaky bits will render down evenly now. I do the same thing with the chicken skins and the beef fat. I've been freezing the trimmings for over the last few weeks, and this way I can make space in the freezer since I don't make lard all that often. I add 1/3 of a cup of water to the mix in the Instant Pot and set it to slow cook. The water helps to start rendering out the fat without overcooking the slices. Since they're frozen, steam will thaw the fat and won't be in direct contact with the heat source at the bottom. As it starts to render the fat, more fat is released, which helps to render the fat and so on. I'll show you later in the video how to get rid of the water, and since the chunks of meat and the fat also have water, we're going to wait until everything melts to separate the liquid from the fat. The biggest variance when it comes to flavoring lard is the kind of lard that you use and also how long you cook it for. Let me explain. There's two kinds of fat in the pig. There's leaf lard, which is right here around the kidneys and it protects it, and then belly lard, this one. This is belly lard. Oh man, I need to lose weight. But leaf lard is right here in the kidneys. So this stuff. By the way, those of you that mock me for this, I know who you are when you watch this video. I still love you. This is all belly lard. It's fine. This one can impact a little bit more flavor. But what adds the most porkiness flavor is cooking it for longer and at a higher temperature. That essentially cooks all the residue that is in lard after it's rendered, and it makes its own chicharrón, and it infuses that into the lard and gives it that little porky flavor, which is great. It doesn't matter. It's great if you're using it for frying or meats, but if you're using it for baking, you want something more neutral. We're gonna try to stick for the neutral, but if we end up getting a little bit meaty flavor, that's okay too. We don't really use this for baking because we hardly bake, and we should change that. But there we go. Two ways of doing this. One, you can chop it really fine. Two, here's a food processor. Grind the living stuffing out of it with either a slicer blade, or I'm going to experiment and use a grating blade. If this works, I'll include it in the video, but slicer blade will. In fact, that worked as well as you might expect. It worked just fine. It makes thin, consistent slices. That way everything cooks uniformly and it renders uniformly. So as you can tell, after the first hour, not much has been rendered. Things have melted, but not much else is happening. There are some pink streaks of meat still attached to the fat. I check it again every so often to make sure nothing is burning or sticking to the bottom of the pan. And since we added water, that hasn't happened. After 4 hours, the meat is turning color. More fat has melted. Just give it a quick stir and cover it back up. After 24 hours, there's a lot more liquid in the pot. Nothing has stuck to the bottom and there are no crunchy bits, which means that there isn't any strong meaty flavor in the fat. So far so good. We're making me nervous. In total, it's been about 30 hours of we've been rendering this lard. The good thing about using an Instant Pot is that you don't need to babysit it. And if you notice a strainer, not every bit of fat is rendered out of the solids. To do that, you can do a second render at a higher temperature, but that will impart more of a meaty flavor, and that's not the purpose of this video. But if you do end up doing that, it's best to do it in a pot and fry off the solids, much like rendering bacon and saving that fat. When it separates, which I think you can kind of tell, you see down here? All of that is the water that I need to scrape off and take away. This is my lard. If you notice here, all of this liquid that separates, you don't want that. That is what causes it to be stinky, smelly, and everything. So we're going to strain it out. There we go. Well, a lot smoother than I expected. I'm going to scrape that up. This is all gelatin, basically. This gives you the water. It's these impurities in water that produce the bacteria that will ruin your lard. So when you scrape it away, you have a clean smelling product that is shelf stable. As an additional experiment, since it has a percentage of chicken fat in it, I kept it in my pantry for about 10 days with no refrigeration. It was perfectly fine. You can't tell anything happened to it, no bad smell, no mold spots, nothing. Since I did open it to check, I did put it in my fridge and have checked it periodically. It's still good, and it's been about 3 weeks now since the time of filming. And there you have it. These are my lard chunks. I cut them in like this for the thumbnail and for presentation. These are getting melted again and put into a jar for long-term storage. It's fantastic to have at home, especially since we don't fry with seed oils. I remember my grandma making tostones with lard, and in the coming weeks I'll show you what that looks like too. We're gonna make croquetas too. It's always been an idea to document the food traditions my family had growing up. We lost so much of that culture when we left Cuba, and in a way technology has transformed the way that we retain information. I literally have hundreds of cookbooks, but I don't foresee my son reading those to cook. So I'm making these videos for reference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.